Good afternoon. You are all welcome to the first presentation of our online seminar series within the scope of summer school program. It's organized by Yaşar University Architecture Faculty, Interior Architecture and Environmental Design Department within the scope of blended intensive programs under Erasmus Plus Higher Education Mobility. I would like to thank to all of you for your participation. I'd like to give very special thanks to our colleagues from ESAD and West Attica for accepting our cooperation invitation. Dionysia, Angelos, Maria, Caterina, Felix, Jose Antonio, Maria Jose, thank you all for your contributions. We are very happy to coordinate this program together with you. And also I'd like to thank to my team, Sergio, Miguel, Üzüm, for all their efforts, and students. I would like to thank you for your interest to the program. We kindly ask you to open your camera so that we can see each other before meeting face-to-face in July. Now I will give the word to Sergio Taddonio. He's the team member of Rhythm Design and Research Group. He's also the coordinator of this program. He will make his presentation titled Creative Restoration, where design reconstructs time. Sergio, the word is yours.
Yes, thank you, Ebru. I am also following Ebru. I want to thank everybody who made this road together with us until today. So actually today is the let's call it the official starting day of the summer school. The first day we are all together. The first day from 3 different countries we meet, and especially, I mean, apart from thanking our colleagues, from ESADE, from West Attica, I also would like to thank all the students who have believed in this particular project, and they are the core actually of this experience. So about today, Ebru has already introduced the title of my presentation today. I would briefly I would start actually from a very important question. That is the question that is being essential now in the development of the conservation concept and conservation theory, and that is fundamental for the definition of the title that I wanted to give to this particular presentation. So it's a kind of a Shakespearean dilemma. And the question is to reconstruct or not to reconstruct. Now, this particular dilemma, as I say, it is at the core of almost 200 years of debate in relation to the practice of conservation and restoration. So to restore or not to restore, and if to reconstruct or not to reconstruct, and if to reconstruct, in which way, according to which principles, by following which methods, by considering only scientific data, or also integrating other type of interpretation of a particular site, of a particular architectural heritage condition. So this is a very, very important, very crucial aspect within the entire history, which is not a very long history. It's about approximately almost 2 centuries of debates around the issue of conservation. Now, I am not planning to explore the entire field and the entire theoretical framework and theoretical body within the discipline of conservation, but it is important to to go back in time and to see, I mean, to recall what some relevant, prominent theoreticians, historians, and experts have been, proposing as possible ideas, as possible approaches to conservation. So I would start from Camillo Boito, Italian theoretician, operating mostly in the second half of the 19th century, who is reminded, especially as the author of the first official document, first official declaration in relation to the practice of conservation, the theory of conservation, which is the Restoration Charter. So the Carta del Restauro, as it is called in Italian. So what was the idea of Camillo Boito? Camillo Boito, thinking of what type of approach to have in relation to ruin monument, to the remains of monument throughout history, he was actually affirming that they have a right to remain in their own state, in their own physical condition, found condition. They have a right to sleep to sleep undisturbed in their last sleep. So what is speaking is sort of a religious preservation. So what is important is, of course, to make sure that the physical conditions of whatever is found do not get worse. So accepting the fact that there should be an attention given, there should be anyway a respect through preservation, but they should not actually be brought back to their original state, their original condition. So to accept the fact that history has brought to us an architectural element, an architectural monument, and accept the particular condition that monument shows in that particular time. Well, that's just the beginning. Of course, the debate goes around this dilemma, as I said, as I introduced at the very beginning. But opinions started to be, of course, dialectic in that relation. So some other personalities like Alois Riegel started to address other type of aspects. So in any case, there is a decision to be made how to intervene, and whatever would be that answer would somehow integrate an aspect of newness. So it's a new decision, even if it's regarding an ancient monument. But what Alois Riegel was also addressing is the fact that is not just a technical issue, but it's also the understanding of how a wide public, of course, would relate with those remains. So in which way they would enjoy those remains. So integrating not only so extending the discourse not only to refer to what are technical ideas, experts' ideas, but also to understand what is the public perception and public understanding and public enjoyment of heritage. Gustavo Giovannoni, again from Italy, he actually speaks of a restoration that might also be scientifically imperfect. So it actually opens up to a possibility to consider some hypotheses also in the process, of the recreation of the original conditions. So hypothesis not purely based on proven scientific data, which is from his point of view preferable considering the complete renunciation of the monument. So to actually somehow contrasting the opinion of Camillo Boito that I introduced at the very beginning. But apart from the individual point of view, individual opinions, individual theories, individual approaches, what we generally refer to in the understanding of how the conservation concept, conservation theory has developed, is especially addressing official documents, most of the time international documents, which were generally completed at the end of international gatherings of experts through conferences, symposia. So, and those documents are what we call as charters. So the very first charter, the Greek colleague would be definitely a knowledge about it. I mean, it's the Athens Charter, now in 1931, where the practice of restoration, now named as anastylosis. So I mean the restoration process of ruined monuments, ruined building, that is performed through reassembling fallen parts, and also in some cases incorporating also new material, was accepted. But the problem that the chart did not yet define was what would be the methodology of completing an architectural monument by integrating what was missing in the found state. So, following the Athens Charter, new documents were completed in 1938, the instructions for the restoration of monuments. In 1964, another pillar, the Venice Charter, and then the Restoration Charter in 1972. So they introduce very important principle, which is the understanding that whatever was supposed to be added or introduced within the remains, or within the remains of what is of a possible original configuration of a monument, would anyway produce a false antique. So it was actually condemned, it was objected, the introduction of new elements produced by the usage of new materials, because they would not respect and would not correspond and not be original. So there was a very important affirmation that restoration must stop where hypothesis begins. But the important, I mean, the secondary aspect of the Venice Charter that is fundamental, actually, and it opens up to possibility of considering this type of approach from a different perspective. So whatever would correspond to a replica of the original would be considered as a false, so as emulating the past, but by not utilizing original elements. But in case of the addition of new elements, these new elements, so actually that's the beginning of the concept of the conceptual reconstruction. Whatever would be added or integrated was necessary that those elements would show the time, their own time, so would bear the mark of their times. So it was not excluded the possibility of integrating an historical building with new components, but those components should have been seen as new elements, so they had to be recognizable, so distinguished by the original components. And so that's what is called a modern discrimination of addition. It's a very important principle. So a new element could have been introduced within a site or within an historical configuration, but they should be integrated by guaranteeing the harmony between old and new. So they should have been visibly works of today and not pretending to be ancient works. That's a very, very important idea. Now, beside those definitions, the definition of shared principle, agreed principle, and agreed methods, several other theoreticians, several other experts were also considering alternative opinion, proposing alternative opinions, alternative ideas. And that's actually what will substance what is going to be soon be introduced by me as the concept of creative restoration. So one of these personalities, Roberto Longhi, a theoretician who in the 1940s proposes the concept of mental restoration. So not only considering the physical consistency of a building, but the image of the building itself. But it's important, the fact that it is the first who is addressing new disciplines within the debate of conservation, which is mostly, in particular, museography and museology and museography. So a possible correction of an original condition, of an original configuration, through techniques of museography to reconstruct an image, so a perceived integrity, not a physical integrity, but a perceived integrity. Those concepts are going to be definitely visualized very, very soon in my following images. And he was not the only one. Again, Cesare Brandi and Renato Bonelli were proposing a similar approach called critical restoration. Again, speaking of the evocative imagination of a site or of a building. So imagination is a new element that is, of course, not, it's a subjective somehow approach, but very much interested with the perception of people, of everybody, of any of us. No, the moment we are relating with history, the moment we are interacting with history. So in this particular context, the concept of creative restoration was born. And what is very important as a shift is the fact that particular attention is given to the experience of a site, of a cultural site from the public. So the idea of how people experience history becomes very important. The second important aspect of it is not only approach in an architectural way or archaeological way, but also consider the aesthetic experiences. So considering also architecture as a work of art. And as I was saying before, another important shift is the fact that new disciplines are entering into the debate, and especially museology, which is the museum science, and museography, which is more interested actually interested in the way the museology, the museum science is implemented, is applied, so the methods and the practice. So we know that the main focus of museography is about how to categorize artworks, how to display artworks, to display whatever is somehow decontextualized. So artworks that are displays in not their original location and in original actually place of realization, but displays it somewhere else. So in which way the artwork is categorized and presented to the public. So the public becomes very, very important. I mean, the idea of how people perceive history becomes very, very important. But of course, we need to understand how those type of principles were implemented. I mean, some professionals tried to translate those words into facts, into action. And that's the case of Franco Minissi, who was an architect and at the same time a professor of museography. So as I said, no, the discipline of museography is central and crucial. So he was interested in the possibility of introducing innovative materials, so new materials, what we were calling new elements within an archaeological site, within archaeological sites, within historical configuration. And he experienced this through a very, very critical aspect or condition of state of being, which is the idea of transparency. That becomes a key element in his work. And what is important in the way he considered transparency, what is the beneficial effect of working on transparency, is the fact that it allows the integration of the surrounding landscape, the territory, so the context that surrounds archaeological sites. That is fundamental also in the decodification of the cultural strata which are embedded into a site. And that's on this particular concept, this particular actually condition, he performs one of the works of his career, which is the restoration or protection of a Roman villa in Sicily, in Piazza Armeria, where he proposes a sort of a critical reconstruction of the site by complementing the ruins, whatever was left through history and found through, of course, archaeological excavation of the Roman builder. And he encloses those ruins with new transparent envelopes, which are allowing, of course, the experience through letting natural daylight to move through those sort of a combination of canopies and vertical partitions. But at the same time, they also allow the reverse experience of seeing through from the inside to the outside. So somehow integrate the landscape, integrate the surrounding context within the experience of the visit of the archaeological site. So this is another picture of the same site. Together with Franco Minissi, Franco Ceschi, another important reference for us, another attempt of translating those principles into action. In the 90s, he was working on a site in Italy, in Beio, and he proposed actually a very original attempt of reconstructing the temple of Apollo. There was an Etruscan temple, and he utilized again a set of new material, mostly still roads. So what he proposed, the temple was actually reduced a few centimeters from the ground. Mostly the temple was somehow absent. Only the footprint of the temple was found. So what he proposes is an evocative work. So in order to allow people to understand the consistency, the volumetric consistency of the original temple, he reconstructs partially the temple by using a metal wireframe, but it's a partial reconstruction. So it is only somehow recreating an understanding, stimulating a semi-realistic perception of the consistency of the original temple. But again, the condition and the quality of transparency is automatically integrated in this way of acting, because still it allows visitors to see through, so not to lose the realistic, actually, situation, that is the situation of the site, the condition of the site, so allows still to perceive the surrounding territory. So it is a sort of an ephemeral way of proposing the reconstruction works, but more conceptual in this case, and more subjective in this case, and definitely alternative to the guidelines or principle that were listed in official documents. So it is an experimental way that generated the sample, generated the possibility. And that means that might be then evaluated, criticized, positive and negative aspect can be defined. But at the same time, it's definitely reversible. I mean, this is something that might be removed at any time. So it is a temporary way of responding to that question. That is the crucial question I wanted to start my presentation with. And he also has the same approach in other works. So this is in Rome, in the National Roman Museum, Crypta Baldi. Again, he locates an original found element of an historical monument. He locates it in its original position, supporting it with, again, a metal wire frame. So it is a sort of a mental projection that allows the understanding, the legibility of the remains of the site. And those references are fundamental for understanding the case study that I want to report about, which is actually was quite important for the definition of the framework of the summer school, of the workshop. Even the title of the workshop is very much based on this particular experience. That is the project proposed by Italian artist Edoardo Tresoldi for the Basilica di Siponto, for the archaeological park of Siponto. So an artistic approach, an artistic proposal within a real conservation campaign conducted in an archaeological site in the southeastern coast of Italy, in Puglia region, which is where I come from, by the way. So let me give few information about the site. As I said, we are in the southeastern coast of Italy, on the Adriatic Sea, region of Puglia, which is the heel of the boot. Now, if you visualize Italy, the form of the peninsula, we are in what is called today Siponto, but originally was called the Sipontum. That is a Roman colony founded approximately 200 years before Christ, where in the 5th century, an early Christian basilica was built, and at the time was named as Gran Duomo Sipontino, then and later on was named as Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore. Now, in this picture, you will only recognize the footprint of the original basilica. That is the foundation level of what has found through archaeological excavation. So the Christian basilica consisted of 3 naves. It was a typical layout with a raised central apse. And the basilica was functioned until the 11th century, where most probably a natural disaster, most probably an earthquake, caused its collapse. So, in the same century, a second basilica was built beside the early Christian basilica, a completely new one with a completely different layout. It's a square basilica. And for the construction of the square basilica that was built in a Apulian Romanesque style, a large quantity of found elements, a large quantity of material that were originally actually constituting the early Christian basilica were reused. So the second basilica was built by reusing the remains of the early basilica. So that means that actually justifies the fact that during the excavation campaign, not a large quantity of original elements were found because they were mostly reused for the construction of the second basilica. So only the foundation level was found. Only the foundation level, actually, what was survived time was actually constituting the remains, the remnants of the early basilica. So in September 2013, the Regional Directorate for Cultural and Landscape Heritage called for the initiation of a conservation campaign, works of recovery, and of the what is nowadays known as the archaeological park of Siponto. So in the intention was to work on both strata of the site. So not only to restore and enhance the second church, but particular attention was given actually to the early layer of the site, which is the early Christian basilica. But the most interesting aspect of this project is the fact that, of course, I mean, the project was committed to a pool of experts, archaeologists, art historians, architects, with a restoration expertise. But this pool of experts decided to, especially with regard to the early basilica, decided to test a possible experimental approach to the conservation plan of the site. And they invited a very, very young Italian artist. That at the time he was, if I'm not mistaken, he was 25 or 26. Ultra young Italian artist, Edoardo Tresoldi, to propose actually a restoration approach that had automatically an artistic background. So what of his artistic background would fit in such a challenging operation? Still guided through a strict scientific approach, philological criteria. But how this proposal of an artist would fit into it, of course, as I say, supervised by a pool of experts, is the story that I want to talk about. So, what was the reason this particular artist, as I said, ultra young artist, was invited? So, what the team of experts knew about this artist is his particular artistic concept of his very short career, which is a concept that the artist himself names as absent matter. So what is this concept about? It's an artistic concept, but at the same time, spatial concept, which is based on two essential fundamental elements. One is the use of a particular material, the wire mesh, and the second one is the particular condition or state of being, which is transparency. And here you may remember the initial approach of what I introduced at the beginning of the creative restoration concept. So wire mesh as a material, but a particular condition, transparency. Again, referring to what the artist also states, it's a mental projection. So anyway, it's a conceptual no, interpretation. It's an artistic concept at the end. It is a filter, so it filters reality through transparency, and it's a form. So in a way, he justifies, or anyway, he synthesizes this conceptual approach in few words. So what he's saying is what has faded away or never existed lives again in a time that is not its own. Of course, very poetic definition, very poetic words. But what is important in this concept, that is the idea of time. So in which way time is integrated. So the fourth dimension actually is integrated into a three-dimensional artwork. And also the fact that the work itself actually materializes an absence. So it is actually, his main interest is to visualize a figure, but at the same time negate that figure by working on the fact that it is transparent, it is somehow undefined. So the idea of absence in his work is at the same time affirmed and negated through the usage of these two particular conditions. So the usage of a particular material and the usage of particular language and condition, which is transparency. But still, his work is a sculptural work. So let's have a look at the artworks he had, some of the artworks he had completed that attracted the attention of the expert who were giving this very big responsibility of working in an archaeological site. So this artwork is called, generally he was invited, or he was proposing project for art festivals, for temporary festivals. So the idea of temporality, actually, it's automatically embedded in his own way of practicing art, by the fact that though his artworks were imagined to have a short lifespan. So this is called the Collector of Winds, and it is a human figure seen from the back that looks at the sea, and it is of course a gigantic dimension sitting on the roof of a building. But the way it is interesting that this artworks actually generates a dialogue now with the environment, with the surrounding environment. So it is perceived in different ways during the day, according to the reflection produced by light, by natural light, by artificial light. It does show itself, but at the same time does not obstacle the perception of what is behind and beside. So it is somehow transparent. It communicates also at the same time emotion, the idea of reflecting, so thinking of these particular figures. And it becomes almost invisible when the background of the figure itself actually matches in a chromatic way. So it almost becomes imperceptible. He continues in this direction, again working on human figures, mostly relating now with nature. Again, this is called thoughts, but he starts to also explore other type of subjects, and he especially is interested in architectural configurations. So this is a work called Incipit. Again, as we can notice, there is a strong relation with the outer landscape, surrounding landscape. There is, of course, an interpretation of the archetypes blended together to create classic forms, which are by their essence metaphysical. And again, the two main characteristics, so transparency and the physical consistency that is obtained through wire mesh, it is confirmed and performed again and again in different type of contexts. This is arcway, most probably designed according to a particular focus. And he continues. He also is working in different contexts. I mean, this is a music festival in London. He proposes, this very, classic architectural configuration that is elevated. So that's actually the name of the artwork, lift. That is elevated as well, kind of a classic architecture, but at the same time, kind of a Zeppelin flying away. So, which is actually a very strong contrast if we consider the particular context, but at the same time, the language he utilizes. So it generates an incredible dialectic in forms and contents. So this was what interested very much the pool of experts who were running the conservation campaign for the archaeological park of Siponto. They were interested in this approach because his artistic approach somehow was possibly linked to what I introduced before as the attempt of responding or interpreting new possible alternative principle of conceptual imaginative restoration. So his artwork was somehow fitting with that practice, but he wasn't at the time aware of the fact that his work could be a valid possibility, could represent a valid possibility in a conservation campaign, and that was not at all his intention. So he was invited to be part of the team, to understand actually what was the problem of the archaeological site and how he would possibly contribute to it. So he had to review his own artistic concept and find out a concept that would be substantially applicable in conservation practices. And that's where that is the time where it translates the absent matter concept into a new concept, which is a translation, which is actually an adaptation. It's not completely new, but what is new is the intention. And that's where he defines this new concept that is called the metaphysical ruin. So it's a development. It's an evolution of the original artistic concept, absent matter, but definitely, I mean, totally based on a review of that concept from an architectural point of view, and within an archaeological dimension. So what he really started to reflect on is the life cycle of architecture. So time was a very consistent aspect of his artwork. Again, he concentrates on time from different type of perspective, which is the progressive decay of architecture, but time also as a possible experience. He was used to work in temporary, with a temporary approach. So in festivals, in art festivals, in music festivals. So the idea of time was for him not only a conceptual reference, but was also a sort of a demand, was also mandatory, because he was supposed to imagine artworks that would finish in time very soon. So he started to reflect on this idea of time and the life cycle of architecture. So how he defines the metaphysical ruin is a living cycle in which nature and architecture alternate and dialogue with one another. He also visualizes this passage from absent matter to metaphysical ruin, trying not to define this cycle. So starting from the absence, so where there is no architecture, that's actually just the natural location of a future architectural work. And that's what he defines as the cycle of absent matter. The absent matter lasts until the moment of the initial idea of an architecture, of a construction. So the design of it, the imagination of it, that becomes then a consistent, a real physical element. Then there is a new moment, a new period that is called the period of matter. So the physical existence, so the primary life of architecture. Until the moment there is another process starts, which is the process of decay, the process of being affected by several different factors, mostly weathering, mostly climatic factors, sometimes natural factors in the case of natural disasters, sometimes human-driven factors in case of conflicts, wars. So several different conditions can generate a progressive decay of historical architecture, and that generates a new state, the state of abandonment, that brings an original architecture into a state of ruin, but still physically consistent. Starting from that point, the question arises, so what we do? So how do we repair? Do we repair? Do we preserve? Do we stop it there? Do we freeze it? Do we leave things the way they are? Do we imagine a possible way of bringing back to a semi-original condition? Where do we stop? So again, there is a moment of absence. So what do we do with what is not there anymore? And then the proposal, the idea of reconstructing that absence in a metaphysical way, that is what is called metaphysical ruin, pops up in his own way of interpreting this process and giving a solution to that process. So Eduardo Pessoa, in a way, defines conceptually an hypothetical approach to the site, but still there is a long way to go. So what to do practically? So he starts to work, he starts to imagine this missing, absent basilica that wasn't there anymore apart from the foundation of it. So he starts to imagine, he starts to sketch, he starts to work on the reconstruction, mental reconstruction of space, dimensions, proportions. He also imagines people practicing the community that would experience this space originally. So he starts to imagine possibilities, start to draw, start to think of how this basilica was consistent. What was the original consistency of the basilica? Of course, it's supported by the experts who were at the same time running their own documentation studies, drawing, the survey drawings, the survey campaign, the restitution drawings. So what was the original or hypothetical or semi-hypothetical consistency of the basilica? But he, of course, sees the problem from a different perspective. But at the same time, he also thinks of his own language that was implemented in his artistic career. But he also sees the relation that are important here. It's a site where two different entities are coexisting. One that is completely missing, apart from few traces, and another one that was built 7th century after, that is actually very dominant in that particular moment. So this relation should also be considered. I mean, that is important, to acknowledge the coexistence of two different times in the same site. And then he comes up with his proposal. Now, there are a lot of stories, I mean, technical stories that I don't have the time actually today to go through. But this is what Edoardo Tresoldi completes on the site. So here you see now the Romanesque basilica built in the 11th century. And here you see the work proposed by Edoardo Tresoldi on the footprints of the early basilica, which is in a way almost invisible. It is somehow an architectural application, but more substantially scientifically supported of his own, of his previous works, his previous artworks. They were not just decontextualized and just conceptual. In this case, actually, there is a concept, but at the same time, there are real proportions. There, in the same time, there is a real location. But at the same time, it is the reconfiguration of the partial reconfiguration of an absence. And again, what is important here, that the way he decides is to keep actually the site conceptually in a state of ruin. It does not reconstruct the entire envelope. He reconstructs a part of it. So it's actually a new contemporary and conceptual ruin. So it's a metaphysical ruin. Still, it is a ruin. It's a partial reconstruction with a completely new method. And he even actually introduced, as he was used to do, human figures, again, materialized with the same usage of wire meshes. But in which the idea of transparency that was fundamental in his early definition of his artistic works enters again into the project. So the territory, the surrounding landscape, it's acknowledged and integrated within the artwork because it is constantly visible. And another acknowledgement is the fact that there is also another important part of the story, which is the basilica built in the 11th century. So this conceptual reconstruction allows a constant recognition of that particular artwork without actually creating a sort of competition between. So the acknowledgement of the territory and the integration of the territory into the work. The acknowledgement of the second basilica and the integration of the second basilica into the artwork. And these are several different views of the same site, of the same artwork, and how the perception of the artwork changes through time, through actually the time of the day, especially with different conditions and changing conditions in terms of lighting. So from natural lighting, where you almost perceive the entire surrounding and just visualize few lines. In a night view, it's completely different. The usage of light emphasizes the volumetric definition of the basilica. And also the experience of visiting, the possibility of visiting the site in nighttime as well. So, as I say, the language of transparency, it is transported from the concept of absent matter into the architectural concept of metaphysical ruin. Time is a very important aspect of his original aesthetic concept, artistic concept, and it becomes very important also in the concept of metaphysical ruin. But of course, time now is not anymore an abstraction. Time is also reality. It is actually embedded into the site. It's known the time of construction of those churches. It is known how much time has passed between the original construction and today. So it is time between the past and the present, but it's also a new time, which is also a projection. So his artwork is supposed to integrate time and to survive. not forever, for a limited period of time. In one of his lecture, he stated that the idea was to create a sort of an installation, a temporary installation on the site for a maximum of 20 years. So it is not supposed to be there forever. So it's a narration. So what he's trying to do, what he proposed, is to narrate a story. So without being dominant, in the way the story itself and the configuration of this story occupies the site. So to revive the memory of the site, but in a silent way. So, and especially integrating new aspects, an important aspect, which is the surrounding territory and the surrounding context. So it is important now to link this artwork to the latest evolution of the conservation debate. So you remember the charters, we talk about the Athens Charter, the Venice Charter. So there is in 2000 the Krakow Charter, so in Poland, which is one of the last stage of this discussion. So the idea of the Krakow Charter is to actually apply principle of restoration not only to monuments, actually, but to the entire built heritage. But the most important aspect of this charter is the fact that landscape is considered as part of an historical site. So landscape has to be considered as an important component. It's not just about physical remains, but it's also about the way the territory affected the original construction, affected the original location of architectural monuments. So landscape has to be acknowledged. The territory, the cultural actually layers of the territory, of human history, and that's why I mean this is another important principle that was conveyed to Edoardo Tresoldi by the team of experts. So what he actually was trying to do in his initial artwork were actually an important principle that would fit very well in the evolution of his original artistic concept. So the scenic value, so exactly the understanding of the theatrical backdrop of the basilica that was important, that was obtained through the usage of wire mesh. Now, if we want to understand what type of new values this particular work has produced, or what type of values we may recognize. Now, this lecture is not does not want to promote or does not want to consider this approach as the most correct approach, but actually he wants to discuss this case as one of the most consistent attempt of proposing an alternative way, actually, and an interdisciplinary way of approaching conservation and reconstruction in particular. But the values that we may identify in his work is the value of respect. So it's a way of respecting the original basilica, the original values of the basilica in many different ways. It is somehow the acceptance that the site is left in its found state. It has not been reconstructed, only conceptually reconstruction for a temporary period of time. It's also recreating the sacrality, the holiness of the site. It's at the end, it's a religious building, by using new forms. I mean, how does it reproduce the sacrality of the space? Is by reproducing the particular typology of the space that is visibly linking to a particular worship worship building. It has a very strong impact also in touristic terms. This was not a primary area of tourism. So if we consider now the touristic impact of this particular work, we understand that people started to visit the site not only because interested in archaeological remains, but they were also attracted by the work itself. That was somehow new, somehow never seen, and that's very, very important. But probably one of the most important value is the novelty. So it's a brave decision from the team of experts to invite an artist. It's very brave for an artist to challenge himself into such a complex operation that might be open to extreme criticism. So it's the novelty of the approach and the novelty of utilizing artistic installations, artistic work into a conservation, into an archaeological park. Those are the main values that we can list and we can recognize in his work. We can discuss about it, but that's what can be seen. Now, interesting. Now, the Granada Convention. We have friends from Granada, 1985. We go slightly back in time, and again, at the same time, I wanted to highlight this because conservation, preservation, as I mentioned at the very beginning, are of course very very deep cultural and somehow technical issues. But at the same time, we always have to remember that anyway, architecture is built for people. Architecture is built for human activities. So preservation of the architectural heritage has somehow delivers a message to the public. And it might not only become a source of knowledge, but at the same time a source of inspiration and creativity. That is another important concept stated by the Granada Convention in 1985. So perception of the public, integrating the public, in a way educating, or in a way stimulating, or in a way generating an experience. So somehow there is this responsibility of any conservation work to communicate itself and to also help people to reflect on it and to imagine it or to visualize things, to learn from it. But it's very important, this interactive aspect of conservation work. So that's why the Basilica di Siponto is for me, and that's why I wanted to propose to all of you this case, because it's a very, very interesting experiment, blending archaeology, conservation, and contemporary art, reintegrating the landscape into it, generating a dialogue between past and present in a different way, or dialogue about time, conceptualizing and creating, having an imaginative approach to the idea of construction and reconstruction. Those are all embedded in this experience. They might be criticized or might be glorified, but it is definitely a case that generates discussion. And that's how I end my presentation, actually, by acknowledging the main resource of this thoughts, which is the paper, an article written by Francesco del Sole. It's called The Architectural Illusion of Edoardo Tresoldi. Francesco del Sole concludes its paper, its article, by affirming that actually the work of Edoardo Tresoldi can somehow complement one of the articles of the Venice Charter in the Article 9. So the Venice Charter was saying that a restoration must stop where the hypothesis begins. So that was like everything has to be based on scientific data and scientific finding. But Francesco Sole, with a provocation, says, maybe we can complement nowadays this article and saying that where restoration does not arrive, the imagination can. And that's the conclusion of my seminar. Thank you for listening.